We continue now at the top of Daf Yud Zayin Amud Aleph from Meseches Yoma. This is Yoma Daf 17a. The Gemara in the previous Amud has shown that Rabbi Yehuda cannot be the author of the Stam Mishnayos in Meseches Midos, and therefore the Gemara returns to its previous answer, Elalav Shma Mina. Rather, do we not see Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov here, that Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is the author of the Mishnayos in Meseches Midos, the Stam Mishnayos, Shma Mina, and the Gemara says, indeed, you see this is the case. Rashi here says, Elalav Shma Mina, Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov he, as we said before, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov, there's an extra step as you ascend up the Harabayas, and therefore it is indeed blocked. The doorway to the Heichel is blocked if someone were to look through the doorway of the first eastern wall, and that's why you have to lower the wall. V'lo b'mizbech, it's not the mizbech that's blocking the view. The Shamina Leila Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov b'Perek Shlishi, the Yomar Kule Mizbech b'Darim Kai. We see, according to Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov in the third parak, that the entire mizbech is in the south. Now Rashi over here towards the bottom gives an alternative explanation of the last daf. He says, "Uve'enai nir lefarish." He says, in my opinion, it appears as follows: Hadar Avad Barava, that which Avad Barava said on the previous daf, v'chol hasugya, in the entire sugya, b'loshan acher. It's really saying something else as follows. Ravada Barava Omar, Ravada Barava says, Hamani amasnisin de Talmud Omar lehem amamunakoi, de Ramya Midos Ilave. When Ravada Barava came along and gave his original answer, he was going on the contradiction not within Meseches Midos, but he was going in the contradiction between the Mishnayos in Talmud and the Mishnayos in Midos. Masnisin de Talmud de Pligi Astama de Midos Rabbi Yehudahi. And what the Gemara was saying was, when Ravada Bar Yaakov said, this is Rabbi Yehuda, he meant the Mishnayos in Talmud that argue on the Stam Mishnayos in Midos is Rabbi Yehuda. The Shamin and Lei the Polig Astama de Midos. The whole point of the Gemara was to say that Rabbi Yehuda argues on the Stam Mishnayos and Meseches Midos. In the first version, the Gemara was saying, in the first version Rashi had presented, Ravada Barava was saying that Rabbi Yehuda is the author of the Mishnayos and Midos, and then the Gemara asks a contradiction. How could that be? According to this, the Gemara is saying the opposite. The Gemara is saying from the beginning, Ravada Barava is saying Rabbi Yehuda is not the author of the Mishnayos and Midos. He's the one that argues in the Mishnayos and Midos, and therefore maybe he's the author of the Mishnayos and Talmud. And that's what the Gemara says. We see that Rabbi Yehuda cannot be the author of the Stam Mishnayos and Midos. Titania, we learned in a brayso, Rabbi Yehuda Omer Mizbeach Memutza v'chulu. In other words, you see Rabbi Yehuda argues on the Stam Mishnayos and Midos. V'isakadaitach Midos Rabbi Yehuda mimashkachas lava atanan. Alma rubei de Mizbeach bedarm kai shma mina v'lo garsinan elalav shma mina Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakovi. According to this version, the Rashi says you don't have the girsa here shma mina Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakovi, that we're trying to prove Rabbi Eliezer ben Yaakov is the author of Midos. That shouldn't be the girsa. Rather, v'hachi perusha. Rather, what it is as follows: Shma mina Midos lav Rabbi Yehudahi. You see from all this conclusively that the Mishnayos and Midos are not Rabbi Yehuda. That was the whole point of the Gemara, to try to say, according to this version, that the Mishnayos in Talmud are actually Rabbi Yehuda. So that's just a different version of learning over the previous Amud. And the Gemara continues. Ravada Breder Rav Yitzchak Amar. Ravada Breder Rav Yitzchak says. Now, this particular statement is trying to answer up the contradiction we had in terms of where the Lishkas Beis HaTloim was. So he says as follows: Hai Lishka Aktsuye Miktzia. Really, this Lishka was along the side. Udaasi mitzafon mischazile bedarim. Somebody who came from the north side would see it, that it would look to him as if it was in the south. Udaasi midarim mischazile betzafon. Someone came from the south, it would look like it was in the north. This is in reference again to a contradiction between Talmud and Meseches Midos in terms of the outline, in terms of the layout of the Lishkos. Rashi over here says, Ravada Bar Yitzchak Amar ha Lishkas HaTloim Aksuye Mixia, meaning Bishteya Mixos Niros. Aksuye Mixia means it was actually seen on both corners. Sharuchi, it was long. Vomedes b'mayriv, was on the west side of that central tracklin. Umareches l'tzad hatzafon vidarim. It went towards the north and towards the south. Ad karov l'miksos shemikan mikan. It was close to both corners. Udasi mitzafon mischazi le'shemeshuch l'tzad darim. If you came from the north, it looked to you as if it was in the south. Yoser, more towards the south. Udasi midarim mischazi le'meshuch l'tzad safon. Someone who came from the south, it would look like it was in the north, and that resolves the contradiction between the Mishnayos in Talmud and the Mishnayos in Midos in terms of where this Lishkas Beis HaTloim was. And the Gemara continues, but it makes sense to say that really it was more in the southwest. Rashi over here says, it makes more sense to say that it was more towards the southwest than the other direction. And even the Mishnayos and Talmud admit that it was more towards the southwest. But the Tana in Talmud was saying when a person is walking midarm l'tzafon, so then it looks a little more like it's in the north part. But in reality, it was more in the southwest than it was in the northwest. And how do we know that? Why does it make more sense to say that? The Gemara explains, Mimai, how do you know again that it makes more sense to say it was in the southwest? Miduraminon lechem aponim alechem aponim. Because there's also a contradiction in terms of where the lishka of the lechem aponim was, umishaninan, and we give an answer to that contradiction. Amar Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua, Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua answers in terms of the contradiction of where the chamber of the lechem aponim was, Mar kachashiv derech yamin, umar kachashiv derech smol. He answers that one was saying from the perspective when you turn to your right, and the other one was saying from the perspective when you turn towards your left. And Rashi over here explains, Rashi says, "Midraminan lechem aponim davasalka daite shehumona volech derech yamin." We thought by the lechem aponim that we're always counting for somebody who's turning towards the right, meaning mitzafon lemayev. The guy starts from the north and goes towards the west. Umimayev ladarim, then he moves to the south. Umidarim lemizrach, then he moves to the east. So lishkas hatzloyim b'tzfonis ma'arav. So if you do in that fashion, the lishkas hatzloyim is going to come out in the northwest. Lishkas hachosamos b'ma'aravis jeromis. The lishkas hachosamos is going to come out in the southwest. Lishkas Beis Hamokad bedromis mizrachis. The Lishkas Beis Hamokad is going to be in the southeast, and Lishkas Lechem Aponim b'mizrachis Sephonis. The Lishka of the Lechem Aponim is in the northeast. Now the problem is that the Mishnah in Midos contradicts that. Because by the Mishnayis in Midos it says explicitly that the Lishkas Lechem Aponim was in the southeast. Now in other words, in the Mishnayis in Talmud it doesn't make it clear where all the Lishkos is. It just follows through the Lishkos in some order. So if you assume that you start Derech Yamin from the north to the west, so then it comes out that you have contradiction. Because again, the Lechem Aponim, if you're following in that fashion in Meseches Talmud, it comes out that the Lishkas Lechem Aponim is in the northeast. And here it explicitly says in Midos that it's in the southeast, so that was a contradiction. And on that contradiction, the answer was given by Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua, that Tana de Midos kachashiv derech yamin kin mefarsh behedya. The Tan in Midos, we know exactly what he's saying, because it says explicitly, Teka'azil money midarim lemizrach, umimizrach letzafon, umisafon lemayrav, umimayrav ledarim. It says you go from south to east to north to west, and then back to south. If you were trying to circle the entire area of the Harabayis, and you're going towards the right on the outside, so that's how you would go around it, and therefore it's clear what's going on in Midos. Now in Meseches Talmud, where it didn't explain anything in terms of the exact direction of the chambers, you could say that there we're going towards the left, Vesulo Sikshi Mide Mehash. Now you're not going to have any contradiction, and the Gemara will go on to say how this proves, this answer of Rav Huna Breder Rav Yoshua proves that it makes more sense to say that the Lishkas Beis Hatzloim was more towards the southwest corner. We'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Yud Zayin Amud Beis.